In 1795, on a small wooded island off the coast of Nova Scotia, in eastern Canada, a teenage boy noticed something strange in the ground. He was exploring the island, a quiet, unremarkable place, one of hundreds scattered along that coast, when he came upon a shallow, circular depression in the earth beneath an old oak tree. A dip in the soil, as though the ground beneath had settled, as though something had once been dug there and filled back in long ago. And above that depression, on the tree, there were said to be old marks, signs, the story goes, that someone had once used that spot for something and had wanted to be able to find it again. The boy did what any curious young person would do. He came back with two friends, and they brought shovels, and they started to dig. They were looking, almost certainly, for buried treasure, because the coast of Nova Scotia was thick with old stories of pirates, and every boy who ever lived near that water had dreamed of finding a pirate's hoard. This was a coastline steeped in such tales. For generations, people along that shore had traded stories of the buccaneers who had once prowled these waters, of chests of Spanish gold hidden in coves and under trees, of marks left on the land by men who meant to return for their plunder and never did. To a teenager standing over a mysterious depression beneath an old oak, with faint marks on the trunk above it, the conclusion would have been obvious and thrilling. This was it. This was the spot the stories were about. What those three boys actually started digging into on that ordinary afternoon was a mystery that would outlive all of them, and their children, and their children's children. A hole in the ground that has swallowed fortunes and lives and more than 200 years of human effort, and has never, to this day, given up its secret. They called it, eventually, the Money Pit. And tonight we are going to climb down into it as far as anyone can, which is not as far as you would think, and look at what the diggers found, layer by impossible layer, at the diabolical engineering that has defeated every attempt to reach the bottom, at the coated stone and the vanished treasure and the men who died trying, and at the question that sits under all of it, the question that has never been answered in 2 centuries of trying. Who built this, and what did they go to such extraordinary lengths to hide? Let us start with the digging, because the deeper those first diggers went, the stranger it became. According to the accounts that have come down to us, the 3 boys began to excavate the depression, and almost at once they found signs that they were not digging through untouched ground. The soil was loose, as though it had been dug before. The walls of the hole they were opening were firm, distinct, the sides of an older shaft that someone had cut into the earth and then filled back in. They were digging out someone else's hole, and a few feet down they hit the first of the layers that would make this place legendary. A platform of logs, oak logs, laid across the shaft, set into the walls, deliberately placed. They pulled the logs out and kept digging, and for a while there was just earth again. And then, about 10 feet deeper, another platform of logs, and then deeper still, another. The story that grew up around the Money Pit describes a shaft interrupted every 10 feet or so by these deliberate barriers, platforms of oak, and in the tellings, other materials too, layers of charcoal, layers of a fibrous material that some identified as coconut fiber, and layers of putty, of the kind used to seal ships. Coconut fiber, on an island off the coast of Canada, where no coconut has ever grown. Ship's putty, deep in a hole in the ground. If those accounts are true, then someone had gone to staggering lengths here. Someone had dug a deep shaft and packed it with imported materials in careful, repeating layers, and then filled the whole thing back in, all to protect something at the bottom. Now, I want to be honest with you, because honesty is the only way to tell a story like this one. Much of what we know about those early digs comes from accounts written down decades later, passed through many hands, growing in the telling the way stories always do around buried treasure. The neat, regular layers, the exotic materials. Some of these details are firmer than others, and serious researchers argue about which parts of the traditional story actually happened and which grew in the retelling. But here is what is not in dispute. Something about that spot convinced generation after generation of people, some of them wealthy, some of them hard-headed, some of them equipped with the best technology of their day, that a great secret lay at the bottom of that shaft. People do not spend 2 centuries and vast fortunes digging into a hole for nothing. Whatever those first diggers found, it was enough to start something that has never stopped. The boys dug as far as they could, and eventually they hit a depth they could not manage with 3 pairs of hands and simple tools, and they gave up for the time being. But they did not forget, and in the years that followed, others came, better equipped, more organized, more determined. Companies were formed, money was raised, investors bought in, convinced that the fortune was almost within reach, that just a little more digging, just a little better equipment would break through to the prize. The first real expedition arrived some years after the boys' discovery, and it would be followed by wave after wave of them across the 19th and 20th centuries. A long, unbroken procession of treasure-hunting ventures, each one certain it would succeed where the last had failed, each one pouring in labor and capital and hope. And this is one of the strangest features of the whole Oak Island story, the sheer respectability of some of the people it drew in. This was not only the province of cranks and dreamers, it attracted serious businessmen, engineers, professionals, people with money to lose and reputations to protect, who nonetheless became convinced that the island was worth everything they could throw at it. Later, the mystery would even draw the attention and the investment of some of the most prominent names imaginable. People whose involvement lent the whole enterprise a weight it might otherwise never have had. When hard-headed people of means keep deciding, generation after generation, that a hole in the ground is worth their fortunes, it tells you something about the strength of whatever lies at the center of this story, whether that something is real treasure or only the almost supernatural power of the belief in it. And the money pit began to reveal the feature that has made it not just a mystery, but a genuine trap. The thing that has defeated everyone who has ever tried to reach the bottom. Water. As the diggers went deeper, past 30 feet, past 60, past 90, they found more of the platforms, and in the most famous part of the whole legend, they are said to have found a stone. A large, flat stone, dark, set into the shaft deep down, and carved with strange markings. Symbols, a code, letters and figures in no alphabet the diggers recognized, cut into the stone by someone, for some reason, and left there deep in the earth. We will come back to that stone because it is one of the great riddles of the whole affair, and because of what it was later claimed to say. But keep digging with the diggers for now, because just below the level of that stone, the money pit sprang its trap. The diggers had gone down around 90 feet or so when they struck water, and not a trickle, a flood. The shaft began to fill with water, and no matter how hard they bailed, the water kept coming, faster than they could remove it, until the pit was flooded to a level it would return to again and again, no matter what anyone did. They had, without understanding it, triggered something, and when later investigators worked out what had happened, the true genius and the true menace of the money pit became clear. The water was seawater, and it was not groundwater seeping in by accident. It was arriving through tunnels. Someone, the evidence suggested, had dug channels connecting the bottom of the shaft to the ocean. Flood tunnels, running hundreds of feet out to the sea, engineered so that if anyone dug down past a certain depth, they would breach the system, and the ocean itself would rush in to fill the pit and drown whatever lay below in an endless, unbailable flood. There were said to be elaborate features out at the shoreline, too, a stretch of beach that had been engineered, artificial, built to gather seawater and feed it into the tunnels, disguised as an ordinary beach so completely that for years no one realized it was part of the trap. Think about what that would mean. Whoever built the money pit, if the flood tunnel account is right, did not simply bury something deep. They designed a machine, a hydraulic trap, using the weight and endlessness of the sea itself as a lock, so that the deeper you dug toward the prize, the more certainly the ocean would rise up and stop you. That is not the work of a pirate hastily burying a chest before sailing on. That is the work of someone with time, resources, engineering knowledge, and an overwhelming determination that whatever was down there should never be reached by anyone who did not know the secret of the tunnels. And that determination has been honored, whether by design or by nature, for more than 200 years, because the flooding has beaten every single attempt, right up to the modern era. Unable to bail the pit dry, the treasure hunters turned to other methods. If they could not empty the shaft, perhaps they could probe it, drill down into the flooded depths, and pull up samples of whatever lay below. And here the story delivers another of its tantalizing fragments. In one of the most famous episodes of the whole saga, near the end of the 19th century, a drilling operation is said to have brought up something remarkable from deep in the pit. Traces of material that suggested the drill had passed through layers of wood and metal and, according to the most electrifying version of the account, a tiny fragment of something like parchment, a scrap bearing what appeared to be a few marks of writing, a piece of a document brought up from 150 feet down in a flooded shaft on a Canadian island. If it was real, it changed everything, because you do not flood protect gold with parchment. Parchment means records. Parchment means whatever is down there might be information, something someone thought worth more than treasure and worth hiding forever. But like the coated stone, that fragment lives in the same maddening fog as everything else about Oak Island. Reported, described, argued over, and impossible now to fully verify. Each of these pieces of evidence is just solid enough to keep the dream alive, and just uncertain enough that it can never quite be nailed down. That is the pattern, repeated across 2 centuries, a discovery that would be conclusive if only it could be confirmed, and a reason, always, why it cannot. Now let us go back to the stone, because the stone is where the money pit stops being merely a hole and becomes something that whispers. The carved stone, deep in the shaft, covered in its unknown symbols, it became the most tantalizing object in the whole story, because a code implies a message, and a message implies that someone wanted something known or found by the right person. For decades, the stone was simply a curiosity that no one could read. And then, well into the story's life, a claim emerged that the code had been cracked. According to that claim, the symbols, once decoded, formed a simple and electrifying sentence, a message stating that far below, an enormous treasure lay buried. 40 feet down, the translation supposedly read, 2 million pounds are buried. 2 million pounds, a fortune almost beyond imagining for the time. Carved in code and set into the shaft as if to confirm that all the digging, all the danger, all the diabolical engineering was in service of protecting a prize worthy of it. But, and this matters, the story of that translation is as slippery as everything else about Oak Island. The decoding appeared long after the stone was first described, and many researchers regard it with deep suspicion. Some believe the translation was invented or embellished, perhaps to drum up investment in the endless and expensive digging. And here's the truly maddening part. The stone itself is gone. It vanished. At some point in the story, it was reportedly kept, used, even displayed. And then it disappeared from the record entirely, and no one today can produce it, or examine its markings, or test whether the famous translation was ever real at all. The single most important piece of physical evidence in the entire 200-year mystery slipped through history's fingers and was lost. So we are left with a memory of a stone and a claim about what it said, and no way to confirm either. It is Oak Island in miniature, Something extraordinary, just out of reach, impossible to verify, impossible to dismiss. So who built it? Who dug a shaft deep into a Nova Scotian island, layered it with imported materials, rigged it with ocean-fed flood tunnels, and marked it with a coated stone? This is where 2 centuries of imagination have run wild, and the theories are as grand as the mystery. Pirates are the oldest answer, the one those first boys surely had in mind. The golden age of piracy had filled that entire coastline with legends of buried plunder. And the waters off Nova Scotia and New England were exactly the kind of place where pirate ships had once sheltered and vanished. The most famous of them, Captain Kidd, was long rumored to have buried treasure somewhere on the eastern seaboard before his capture and execution. And Oak Island slotted neatly into that legend. A lonely wooded island, a hidden shaft, a fortune sealed away by a doomed pirate who took the location to the gallows with him. It is a romantic and satisfying story. But many find the pirate theory hard to accept for one simple reason: the engineering. Pirates buried treasure quickly and moved on, digging a hole and rolling a chest into it under cover of darkness. They did not spend months, perhaps years, excavating 100-foot shafts and constructing elaborate hydraulic flood systems fed by disguised beaches and tunnels running out to the sea. The money pit, if it is what it appears to be, is too sophisticated, too laborious, too permanent for a burial in the night. It speaks of an operation, not an escape. So the theories climb higher. Some propose the Knights Templar, the medieval order whose lost wealth and legendary secrets have been attached to 100 mysteries. The idea being that the Templars, or their successors, crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus and hid something of immense value. Perhaps not merely gold, but sacred relics or secret documents in the depths of the island. Others have suggested the treasure of the Aztecs, spirited away from the Spanish. Others still point to Francis Bacon and the theory that the original manuscripts proving he wrote the works of Shakespeare lie preserved in the pit. Naval treasure hidden by a fleeing army, the crown jewels of France. Each theory reaches for something grand enough to justify the sheer scale of the effort that seems to have gone into the ground here. Because the engineering demands a motive to match, and no ordinary treasure feels big enough. And then there is the quietest theory of all, and in some ways the most unsettling, because it threatens to dissolve the whole mystery. The possibility that there is no treasure, and never was. Some geologists and researchers have argued that the money pit may be, in large part, a natural formation. The bedrock beneath Oak Island contains anhydrite and limestone, the kind of rock in which underground voids, cavities, and sinkholes naturally form, and into which seawater naturally flows. A natural sinkhole could produce a loose, shaft-like depression. Natural water channels could produce the flood tunnels. And 2 centuries of frantic, overlapping, poorly recorded digging could have churned the site into something that looks far more deliberate than it ever was, with each generation of treasure hunters finding evidence left behind by the generation before and mistaking it for the work of the original builders. In this reading, the money pit is a monument not to buried treasure, but to human hope, a natural hole that swallowed the dreams and fortunes of everyone who convinced themselves it was something more. I cannot tell you which of these is true. No one can. And that is precisely why Oak Island has never let go of the human imagination. But whatever the truth, one part of the story is grimly, undeniably real, and it is the part that gives the mystery its darkest edge. People have died here. Over the long history of the digging, 6 men have lost their lives in pursuit of whatever lies at the bottom of that pit, in accidents, in collapses, in the flooded and treacherous shafts. And out of those deaths grew a legend, a piece of Oak Island folklore that the treasure hunters tell one another still, that according to the old prophecy, the island will not surrender its secret until 7 men have died looking for it. 6 have. The island, the legend says, is still waiting for the seventh. Whether you believe in curses or not, the deaths are real, and the danger is real, and the failure is real. Because here is the astonishing bottom line of the entire 200-year saga. With all the money that has been poured into Oak Island, with all the lives risked and lost, with modern excavators and pumps and drills and cameras and engineering that those first boys could never have dreamed of, no one has ever successfully reached the bottom of the money pit and recovered whatever, if anything, is down there. Every attempt has been defeated. The flooding beats the pumps. The shafts collapse. The ground gives way. The site, churned by centuries of digging, becomes ever more confused and ever more dangerous. Fortunes have gone into that ground, and nothing has come out but water and mud and the occasional maddening fragment. A scrap of old metal, a link of chain, a piece of wood, a trace of something that might be significant, or might be the debris of an earlier failed dig. Just enough to keep hope alive, never enough to answer anything. That is the true diabolical genius of the money pit, whoever or whatever made it. It gives you exactly enough to believe, and never enough to know. It has done this to clever men and rich men and determined men for over 200 years, and it is doing it still. Every generation believes it will be the one to finally crack it. Every generation brings better technology and greater certainty, and every generation walks away with muddy hands and empty pockets, having added only its own layer to the confusion, its own chapter to a story that refuses to end. The oak tree the three boys stood under is long gone. The original shaft has been dug and redug and lost in the churn of centuries, until no one can even be entirely sure exactly where the first hole was. The coated stone has vanished. The men who might have known the truth are dead, some of them killed by the very mystery they chased. And the island sits there still, off the quiet coast of Nova Scotia, green and ordinary looking, giving no sign at all of the fortunes and the lives and the centuries it has swallowed. Maybe there is a treasure down there, sealed behind the sea, waiting. Maybe there are secrets worth more than gold. Maybe there is nothing but rock and water and the wreckage of 200 years of human longing. The island knows. The island has always known. And it has kept that knowledge the way it kept everything else, deep and dark and just below the waterline, where no one has ever quite been able to reach. The ground gives up what it chooses to give up, and Oak Island has chosen, for over 2 centuries, to give up nothing at all. It simply takes what is brought to it, the money, the machines, the hope, and sometimes the men, and it fills back in behind them, and it waits, exactly as it has always waited, for a seventh that may never come.